What starts as a peaceful solo hike through Wombeyan Karst Conservation Reserve quickly unravels into something far stranger in the Gumtree Hollow. When an experienced bushwalker sets out to complete a scenic loop trail in a single day, he finds the path subtly changing beneath his feet, vanishing markers, repeating landmarks, and a growing sense that something in the forest is watching. As time distorts and unnatural silence descends, he begins to question whether he's lost or trapped. Whispers move through the trees, footsteps echo where no one walks, and objects from his past appear where they shouldn't. Haunted by visions and pursued by an unseen presence, he must confront the terrifying possibility that the trail doesn't want him to leave. It wants him to stay forever. A slow-burning psychological horror rooted in the Australian bush. This story blurs reality, memory, and the eerie pull of the wild. Welcome to Sunday Scares, where the shadows whisper and nightmares come to life. But did you know that 96% of you watching aren't subscribed? If you love chilling tales that keep you up at night, hit like to feed the darkness, and subscribe if you dare. Now turn off the lights, settle in, and let the horror begin. I never planned to stay overnight. That's the first thing I told the ranger afterward, when my lips were cracked and my voice barely came out as more than a dry rattle. I told him it was meant to be a loop, a 25-kilometre hike through Wombeyan Karst Conservation Reserve, in and out in a day. I'd walked longer, camped deeper, and dealt with rougher bush than what was ahead of me. The trail was supposed to be scenic, a little isolated, and not too technical. I wanted quiet, not survival. But the reserve had something else in mind. I arrived early, a thin veil of mist still clinging to the tops of the gums as I pulled into the gravel lot. My car was the only one there, which I liked. No signs of other hikers, no voices bleeding through the canopy. Just the chirr of cicadas warming up for the day, and a few distant bird calls breaking the stillness. The air tasted clean, eucalyptus and dry bark. I slung on my pack, double-checked my water and GPS, and passed under the faded wooden trailhead sign. The track dropped fast, winding through towering white gums that leaned like sentinels over the ridgeline. It was beautiful at first, dry and skeletal in a way that only the Australian bush can be, with sunlight flickering through dusty leaves and long fingers of rock poking out of the ground like the backs of buried giants. Wallabies darted away through the underbrush, and I passed a few animal tracks pressed into patches of soft earth. Nothing unusual, just enough movement to remind me I wasn't totally alone. I had hours ahead of me, and I liked the pace. Easy footing, steady elevation, no real signs of weather. Somewhere around midday, the first strange thing happened. I came across a tree that didn't fit. A tall, blackened gum with an unusual bend in its trunk, one that looked like it had once twisted violently in on itself. The bark had stripped away near the middle, exposing pale, flaking wood beneath. The shape of it stopped me. It looked impossibly like a face. Not carved, grown. A mouth open in a long, silent scream. There were two knotholes just above it, dark and sunken like eyes. I stepped back without even realizing I had. Reached for my phone to snap a photo, and froze. A wave of unease hit me like I'd just walked into a room where something bad had happened. My stomach churned. A metallic taste filled my mouth. I slowly lowered the phone, slid it into my back pocket, and kept walking without taking a picture. I didn't look back at the tree. That's when the path began to vanish. Not all at once, subtly. The dirt underfoot became looser, less defined. The scuffs and boot prints from earlier disappeared. I paused and turned to look behind me. The trail I'd just followed was swallowed by bush, not a clear opening, not even a suggestion of direction. Just scrub and shadows. I turned forward again and walked a little faster. 10 minutes later, I stopped to check the time. 2:13 p.m. I remember that exactly, because when I looked again later, after what felt like an hour of walking, it still read 2:13. I tapped the screen. It didn't change. Pulled out my phone. No reception. The GPS refused to load. The compass app opened, spun briefly, then crashed. That was when I knew something wasn't right. I'd been bushwalking enough to know the difference between getting turned around and being somewhere you shouldn't be. Still, I kept moving. What else could I do? Turning around would only get me more lost. I thought if I stayed calm, followed the slope of the land, maybe I'd hit one of the known fire trails or a creek bed and reorient myself. I hadn't felt truly afraid yet, just confused, like I was caught in a pocket of space the rangers hadn't mapped. I told myself it happened, that some sections of the reserve were under-maintained, that the track had grown over. But then the silence thickened. The birds stopped, even the insects. The air grew still and warm like breath held too long. And in that silence came the first sound, a soft, deliberate tapping. 3 knocks, spaced evenly, wood on wood, or knuckle on bark. I turned. Nothing but trees. The tapping came again, slightly to my left now, then a whisper of wind that wasn't wind at all, carrying the faintest voice I couldn't quite make out. I didn't call out. I didn't run. I just turned back to the way I'd come, or thought I had, and began walking fast, hands trembling, jaw clenched. That's when I saw something I couldn't explain. A red thread tied to a low branch, one I hadn't tied, and right then I knew I wasn't where I thought I was anymore. At first I told myself someone else must have tied it. The red thread on the branch. Maybe a hiker marking the trail. Maybe a ranger's survey line. But the knot was familiar. It was the same overhand loop I used to tie my own bandanas to trees. I stared at it longer than I should have, the blood in my ears pounding. There was no way. I hadn't circled back. I'd been moving in a straight line. Hadn't I? I took the thread off the branch, shoved it into my pocket, and kept walking. Every now and then, I'd stop and carve a small mark into a tree with my penknife. Something shallow but distinct. After 10 minutes, I marked another, then another. I did this 6 times. But when I paused to rest near a large fallen log, I turned and saw the very first mark again. The same curl of bark I'd peeled. The same tiny knot of ants crawling along it. I froze. My throat tightened. I felt the forest press in, not physically, but perceptually, the way it seemed to tilt around me, as if I were a pebble in the center of a bowl. I stood there sweating, head spinning. The light above was still grey, still static. The sun hadn't shifted, not 1 degree. I checked my watch again. 2:13 p.m. Still. I pressed my thumb against the face, hoping the condensation was messing with it. Nothing changed. I opened my phone, black screen, tried to restart. It blinked once, then died completely. That's when I noticed how quiet it had become. No insects, no birds, no wind. Even the sound of my own breathing seemed dulled, like I had cotton in my ears. I turned slowly and scanned the trees. The gums around me were wider now, older, many of them hollowed at the base. Great dark mouths yawning open beneath the white bark. One of them looked as if it had fire damage, the inside blackened to ash. I stepped past it carefully, as though it might reach out and take hold of me. And then, as I crested a ridge, I saw it. A perfect circle of cleared earth, ringed by evenly spaced gums. No underbrush, no leaves, just soil and dust and that same thick silence. The trees leaned inward slightly, as though drawn to whatever had once stood there. I didn't want to go in. Every part of my body resisted the idea. but my feet carried me forward anyway. The moment I stepped into the circle, the air changed. Pressure dropped. The humidity vanished. I could hear again, not sound exactly, but a low thrum, like something humming beneath the earth. It vibrated through my soles and into my bones. My mouth went dry. I spun slowly, scanning for movement, heart pounding. Something moved behind one of the trees, not fast, not fleeing, just shifting, as though it had always been there and was only now becoming visible. I saw a pale shoulder, something long and jointed, moving with unsettling grace. A human shape, but not. No sound of footsteps, no breath, no birds disturbed. I blinked, and it was gone. A whisper moved past my ear. Not outside, but inside my head. It wasn't words, exactly. More like impressions. Stay. You're seen. You're known. You're wanted. I stumbled back out of the circle, falling onto my side and scraping my hand. I scrambled upright and ran, crashing through bush, brambles tearing at my pants, roots catching at my boots. I didn't care. I had to move. I kept running until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed in a dry gully and lay there, gasping, arms spread. That's when I noticed something worse. The ground was covered in bones. Tiny ones. Bird skulls, rib cages, femurs the size of pencils. Clean, picked dry, arranged in strange spirals. I sat up fast and backed away on hands and heels. My eyes darted across the clearing. Each spiral was surrounded by small rocks. Some had patterns etched into them. Some looked burned. One of them, in the center of the largest spiral, had a red bandana tied around it. My red bandana. I hadn't worn it today. I hadn't packed it. My stomach twisted. I stood up, shaking, and kept moving, slower now, half expecting every bush to peel open with teeth. The trees were thicker here. Every trunk had marks, scratches, gouges. Some looked like runes, others like nails dragged across bark in blind panic. As the light faded, though I couldn't say if it was dusk or some trick of the air, I found a hollowed tree big enough to crawl into. I didn't sleep. I just curled up inside, knees drawn tight, knife in hand, listening. At some point in the middle of the night, I heard knocking again, but this time it was from inside the tree. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My breath seized in my throat as the knocking echoed through the hollow trunk. Slow, measured, like someone tapping with the back of their knuckles, gently, patiently, waiting for me to respond. I gripped the knife harder, though I knew it would be useless if something decided to crawl in. My body shook violently, and I tried to press myself further into the curve of the wood, like I could disappear into it if I became small enough. The sound came again. 3 taps, then silence. I waited. It didn't return. Eventually my eyes drifted shut, but my mind didn't follow. I hovered in some twilight state between waking and fever dream, drifting through old memories twisted in strange ways. My mother's voice calling me from a forest I'd never been in, the crunch of leaves beneath boots that weren't mine, the smell of smoke and wet bark, and always that knocking. When I opened my eyes again, light had returned, but not sunlight, just that same grey, muted glow that had followed me since I'd first checked the time. I crawled from the tree slowly, muscles stiff, blood sluggish. The world outside felt wrong. The air hummed, and every surface, rocks, branches, even the ground, seemed to pulse subtly, like a heart beating just beneath the skin of the earth. I walked without thinking, one foot in front of the other, through bush that offered no direction. The hallucination started around midday. I saw my mother standing between 2 stringy barks, her face turned slightly, hair moving through there was no wind. She didn't speak, just stared. When I blinked, she was gone. Later, I heard my own voice calling me from ahead. Same tone, same rhythm. Come on, just a little further. Like I was following myself into the bush, I ignored it. I kept my eyes down, focused on my feet. But when I stepped through a thicket of ferns, I found something that stopped me cold. A map. My map. The one I'd folded and tucked into my back pocket that morning. It was open, lying neatly on a flat stone, weighted by a twig. No rips, no water damage, but the trail I'd planned was gone. In its place was a spiral drawn in thick red pen, one continuous line curling inward toward a single black dot. I didn't pick it up. I left it there and walked on, heart hammering. That afternoon, I found another clearing, but this one wasn't empty. A tall figure stood at the far end. It wasn't human. Not fully. The proportions were wrong. Limbs too long, torso too narrow. Like something imitating a person from memory. Its skin looked like the surface of a fallen tree, flaky, dry and dark, like it had been burned. Its head turned slowly toward me. It had no face, just an open, vertical split where a mouth should have been. Inside was hollow, pitch black. It didn't speak, didn't move. And yet I heard it, not aloud, but in the back of my mind, like a memory you can't quite shake, a voice without words, a message without language. You're part of this now. I turned and ran, sobbing, crashing through the bush without direction, not caring what I hit or if I tore my legs open on rocks or wire grass. I ran until I couldn't breathe, until the thorns tangled in my socks and I fell hard onto the dirt. That's when I heard the magpie, one note, then another, and the wind, real wind, cool and sharp, threading through the gums. I sat up. Ahead of me, through the trees, I saw a line of fencing, a boundary. Beyond that, a dirt road. I ran, limped, crawled. My boots were shredded. My legs were bleeding. I didn't care. I climbed the fence, tumbled down the embankment and hit the gravel hard. I lay there until a car came by. I think I waved. I think I said something. The next thing I remember clearly was sitting in the back of an ambulance with a space blanket around my shoulders. The ranger who found me asked where I'd come from. Loop trail, I said. Wombian. He frowned. That trail's been closed for over a year. Fire damage and a collapsed footbridge. No one's meant to be out there. I didn't argue, I just nodded. They found my car. They found some slashes in a tree. But none of the clearings. No bones. No markings. No red thread. I went home and didn't tell anyone what really happened. But that wasn't the end of it. A month later, I opened my cupboard and found a red bandana sitting neatly folded on the top shelf. I hadn't worn one in years. It wasn't the one I'd packed. It was the one I'd left wrapped around a stone in a spiral of bones. Last week, I heard tapping on my bedroom window. 3 knocks. Even. Measured. It was 2:13 p.m. I've closed dozens of trails over the years, but none stuck with me like the old still track. It twisted through the older parts of the Tannibrin rainforest, deep in the Otways where the air smells like cold earth and wet bark, and trees grow so thick you can't tell the time by the sky. The path had been unofficial for years, just a faint line stamped in by bushwalkers with maps too old to know better. But it got used, and in the last decade, it gained a reputation for wrong things. First, a girl went missing, then a couple, then 2 solo hikers in one summer. Bodies were never found, just packs, phones without signal, one tent zipped from the inside, gear untouched. After that, Parks Victoria made it official. The track was closed. We posted signs, cut the access at the main road, but people are curious, so I volunteered to close it again, properly. A final walk-in to remove an old direction post that had rusted halfway to the ground and to post one last large warning sign. Trail closed. Do not enter. I was used to solitude, but something about the Otways felt heavier that morning. The clouds hadn't lifted. The forest was soaked from 3 days of rain, and everything smelled like a wet cave. The trees here, mountain ash and beech, were so tall you didn't feel wind, only water dripping down. I left my truck at the fire trail gate and walked in with just a pack, bolt cutters, and the rolled metal sign strapped to the frame. The forest swallowed sound quickly. By the time I reached the first fork, I couldn't hear the road. Not a magpie, not a kookaburra, just the rhythmic slap of my boots on damp ground and the quiet groan of trunks swaying somewhere above. I passed the sign I'd come for. Half submerged, faded white lettering that had once read, "Still track, ridge access." It leaned sideways like it was trying to fall over and couldn't. I clipped the bolts, threw it in the bush, and moved on. 100 meters further, I found the clearing where I planned to plant the new sign. A wide bend with a natural choke point, framed by thick ferns and young eucalypts. I pulled out the post driver and sank the sign into the soil. The sound echoed too far. As I hammered, I realized how quiet everything had become. Even the usual drips and creaks were gone. The bush didn't feel empty, just still. Like the name of the trail meant something more than I'd thought. I finished and stepped back. The sign stood clean and bright against the gloom. I should have turned around then. Should have gone back to the ute, filed the report, and never returned. But something about the silence felt wrong. I don't know why I noticed it. Maybe it was just a feeling. But it struck me that my boots weren't making sound anymore. Not even in the mud. I stomped deliberately. No squelch, no scuff, just the motion. Then I heard the footsteps. Behind me, not mine. Not close either. About 10 meters back, soft, careful. I turned expecting to see another ranger, maybe a hiker who ignored the barriers. But there was no one. Only the trail, winding through low ferns and mist. I waited. Nothing. I called out, "Hello?" Still nothing. I should have left. That's the moment. Right there. But I told myself it was nerves. The forest playing tricks. I was used to long patrols alone. I turned back to the sign, took a quick photo for the report, and started walking the way I'd come. But the trail didn't look the same. The fork was missing. The tree roots that had curved across the ground like veins were gone. Even the sapling I remembered brushing past my arm was nowhere to be found. I walked faster, heart ticking, breath short. The forest didn't change, it just refused to stay remembered. I stopped, turned in a full circle. That's when I saw something carved into the bark of a tree I hadn't noticed before. 3 parallel lines, clean and deep like claw marks. Below them, in letters so fine they looked stitched. Still, still, still. The wind returned cold and sudden, and from somewhere ahead on the path, though I couldn't see a soul, I heard someone walking toward me. The footsteps stopped the second I moved, like whatever was ahead had paused to listen. I didn't call out again. Something about the silence made me feel like a voice might draw something too close. I took 2 cautious steps forward, boots now making sound again, soft thuds on wet soil. I couldn't see anyone, just more trees leaning in strange directions, like their roots were twisted wrong beneath the earth. I turned around to leave, to backtrack, but the trail behind me had changed. It looked narrower, too narrow, almost like it had never been walked at all. No cut branches, no scuffed tracks, just bush, endless bush. And the air, it wasn't right. It felt stale, almost stillborn, like nothing had moved through here in a very long time. I pressed forward instead. I told myself there must be a bend, some feature I missed. A landmark, a stump, a fern I could latch onto. But the more I looked, the more I realized everything around me was unfamiliar. Even the undergrowth. The ferns were taller, their fronds sharper, browning in a way I hadn't seen before. I took out my compass. The needle spun lazily, then locked on a direction that felt wrong. Southeast, toward where the land dropped steep into the gorges. I turned it in my hand, trying to get it to correct. It didn't budge. The needle sat there, unwavering, like it had chosen something, and didn't care what I thought. That's when I heard whispering. Not a voice, exactly. More like movement shaped like words. Not wind, not leaves, but something brushing through the trees, circling ahead. I backed against the nearest trunk, heart pounding, and waited. The sound passed through the bush without moving a branch. And then maybe 30 meters ahead I saw someone, a figure, standing perfectly still. A woman, I think, pale, barefoot, in what looked like a nightdress. Her hair hung over her face, soaked and knotted. Her arms hung at her sides, fingers twitching ever so slightly. I didn't move, neither did she. We stood like that for what felt like 10 minutes. Then she took one step back and vanished behind a tree. Just like that. Gone. I ran. I don't remember choosing to, but my legs carried me with more speed than I knew I had left. The forest blurred, green and brown streaks in every direction. The air felt thick, like it was pulling at me, trying to slow me down. I didn't care. I just ran until I stumbled into a burnt-out clearing ringed with towering blackened trunks. Fire had torn through here long ago, leaving skeletal remnants of trees. And in the center of the clearing, half buried under ash, was an old park sign. I knelt, brushing it off with shaking hands. Faded yellow text read, "Still track, closed." But the part that stopped me cold was underneath. Someone had etched names. Not park staff, not signatures. Names, scratched roughly into the wood. First names, dozens of them. Nina, Ella, Jacob, Stephen, Malcolm, Dana, Blake. Some were nearly worn away, others looked fresh. Some had been crossed out with deep gouges. My fingers hovered over one in particular. My own. Chris. The same way I wrote it. The same slightly curled C. I backed away, breath caught in my throat, and turned toward the trail. Only there was no trail, just trees. And worse, I knew every single one of them. Their placement, their bends, their scars. I'd passed this spot before, and again and again. The forest wasn't looping, I was. Or it was keeping me in a place that didn't move the way it should. I stopped moving. I sat down in the middle of the burnt clearing and waited, because I knew the next step wasn't physical. I wasn't lost in geography. I was lost in something else. Memory, maybe. Dream logic. A trap made of recognition and absence. When the whispering returned, it came from all sides. Still, it said, over and over. Dozens of voices, childlike, dry, like mouths without moisture. I pressed my hands to my ears. The sound was inside my head anyway. Then I heard my own voice say it. Still. Followed by my own footsteps just behind me. I turned and saw nothing. But my boot prints were there, clear in the ash, walking in a circle. I stood in the center of my own boot prints, watching the ash tremble with each breath I took. The circle was perfect. I hadn't just walked it once. The ground was worn, trampled from endless repetitions, like I'd been looping this clearing for days, weeks. I couldn't remember when I'd first arrived. The sky hadn't changed. Still that grey, cloudless wash that gave no hint of time. I dug my fingers into my scalp and squeezed until pain brought me back. I told myself it wasn't real. I wasn't trapped. I was just tired, hungry, confused. That was when the forest shifted. The trees leaned, not dramatically, just enough that I felt it. A subtle tilt in every trunk, like they were turning their attention toward me. The whispering faded. In its place came breath. Not wind. Breath. Inhale. Exhale. Deep and slow, like something asleep was beginning to stir. I ran again. But this time, I didn't head for the trees. I ran the other way, off trail, entirely, crashing through thick scrub, battering through saplings and spiderwebs, following no compass, no direction, just away. I didn't care what I hit. The bush tore at me, sticks, roots, stones. But I kept going. The air grew colder the deeper I pushed. My hands went numb. The canopy darkened, not with night, but with age. Everything above me looked older than time. Then I found the track again. It was there, sudden and clean. Wide, packed earth with parallel rows of grass along the sides. And there, standing in the middle of it, was the new sign I'd planted hours ago. Trail closed. Do not enter. Only now the words had changed. They read, "Still here." I blinked, rubbed my eyes. "Still yours." The letters shifted like water. My knees buckled. I grabbed the post, expecting it to dissolve, but it was solid, cold, real. The bolt holes were still warm from where I'd hammered them in. This was where I started. And then I realized this wasn't just a loop in the forest. It was a loop in me. Something had turned the track inside out, and I'd followed myself in a spiral that had no center. Behind me, the footsteps returned. No effort to hide them this time. Crunch, crunch, slow and even. I turned, and I finally saw it. Not a figure, not a person, just an outline. Tall, ragged, shaped like a tree that had never stopped growing. Its body was covered in scraps of red cloth. Bandanas, shirts, flags, torn and knotted into its limbs. Its face was a void, a hollow shaped like a screaming mouth, but no sound came out. Still, it just stood there, still. Watching me, I don't remember choosing to kneel, but I was on the ground, crying. My breath fogged the sign. I whispered, "Please let me go." The thing tilted its head, and then, for the first time, I heard it speak. But it didn't use words. It gave me a memory, a vivid image of the girl who'd vanished here years ago. I saw her tent, her socks, the scratch on her shin, the way she laughed at herself when she got lost. And then I saw her face when she realized no one was coming. Then I saw another, and another. Dozens of moments, people caught in the forest's eye. Every one of them still here, not dead, not alive, still. Then it stepped back into the bush, and the whispering stopped. Everything did, even the breath. The forest exhaled, once, and then fell silent. I stood, my legs worked, my compass worked. The trail was clear again. I walked the entire way back without stopping, not even to drink. The ute was there, right where I left it. The radio worked. The sun had shifted. 3 hours had passed. 3 hours? It made no sense. The next day I filed my report, submitted the photos, logged the sign as installed. I left out the details, the whispers, the woman in white, the names on the board. I didn't mention the sign changing words, or how the metal post smelled faintly of burnt leaves when I leaned close. They accepted it, closed the file. Still track is shut now, properly. Even the access road is chained. But sometimes when I sit on my porch and the wind dies down, I swear I can smell that forest again. Wet ash and fern oil, like it's waiting. And once, just once, my compass, the one I keep in the glove box, spun on its own and pointed south, back toward the Otways, back towards Still,